Hi, welcome to the Military Veteran Podcast. My name is Tim Shaw, and my other co-hosts are Lenore Carafa, Brendan Aronson, and Bo Higgins. Today, I am delighted to be interviewing Emery Wager. Emery is a Marine veteran, Stanford graduate, and a legal tech entrepreneur. Emery and his family live in the Pacific Northwest, and I am really delighted to interview him because he's one of the founders that we've invested in that context. Emery, can you please share how you went from the Pacific Northwest to Stanford?
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for having me, Tim. Really appreciate all the support and for being here today. I ended up at Stanford because I was semi-obsessed as a kid with small boat sailing and small boat racing. So this is like one person, one step up from basically a windsurfer. Um, and so I did that a lot, competed at a fairly high level, and I wish I had a more academic, reason for choosing it, but they had a great sailing program and a great team that I really kind of bonded with as I was kind of looking at schools. And of course, the academics are not too bad there as well. So that's kind of how I ended up going from the Pacific Northwest down to sunny Palo Alto.
So, for the background for the listeners, I know about your professional journey very well. So, I'm now actually much more curious about 0 to 21. And so, can you talk about like where you grew up? What was it like? How'd you get into sailing? I think you're really into outdoor sports. Yeah, talk more about you as, kid and teenager.
Yeah, so my parents had a small sailboat growing up, and for those, who've been up here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a beautiful, you can basically sail all the way to Alaska, up through an inside passage, and so there's, islands and just a lot to explore. And I was lucky enough, to have the opportunity to do that on a small sailboat as a kid with my parents, and that really, that really sort of gave me the love of the water and of sailing. And I've never really found a sport. I mean, for those who don't know, this will sound kind of ridiculous, but I've never found a sport that marries kind of physical competency with tactical and strategic um, ability. Because you can work really hard on a windy day and go off, on completely the wrong side of the course. And it doesn't matter how hard you're working physically. So you have to not only work really hard physically, at the same time you have to have the strategy and the tactics of interacting with the boats around you. So that has taught me a lot over the years. I think it really prepared me well for the military, oddly enough. So yeah, that was a big part of my childhood was competing there, and I just enjoyed doing it. And racing was a great way to continue to do it and to continue to kind of test whether I was getting better or not. So that was a big part of my childhood. The second kind of biggest part of growing up for me, um, we lived right next to the University of Washington football stadium. And when I was 9, my friend and I started a small kind of lemonade stand type business where we would sell dog bone shaped, purple dog bone shaped cookies to all the fans who would walk to the stadium. And the first we had a bakery make like 200 the first time, and we sold out in like half an hour. This was back when everybody had cash, so you could just like trade a dollar, a cookie for a dollar. That kind of snowballed over the years. We did it. I mean, it lasted long after I graduated high school, but we started selling it to Safeway, QFC, a lot of the local stores. Alaska Airlines would carry them on their charter flights to the away games, and so that really set in motion kind of the entrepreneurial drive in me. And when I think about what I wanted to do when I was getting out of the military and thinking about what where was I having kind of the most fun career wise, I look back on that experience. It was called Wolf Cookies, and I look back on that experience, and that's kind of what I wanted to sort of emulate with my career.
And so while you're at Stanford, you're sailing. I want to say you met your wife on the sailing team, and so so that's another good reason to know how to sail. Apparently, I think you were an upperclassman, so you impressed her with your skills. What was it like at Stanford?
I mean, I did a little bit of academics. I majored in mechanical engineering, but we were traveling most weekends to compete, and so I do. You know, I don't have too many regrets, but I think I did spend a little bit too much time focused on competition, and sailing, and if I could go back and do it again, I would have leaned in a little bit more, not to like the actual classes, but there's such Stanford is such an amazing place in terms of the people that they get to come speak and the opportunity, and to me, as a immature undergrad, that it's to some degree kind of went in one ear and out the other, and I wish I had taken more advantage of that. But I got a kind of a great education there, have a great community from there. I do have a little bit of heartburn in some ways with how the university has tackled certain issues kind of in the past, especially around kind of support for veterans and whatnot. But I overall, yeah, just was very grateful for the experience, even if I spent a little bit too much time competing.
The campus brought back ROTC actually when I was a grad student. And so that actually
Oh,
enabled me to
interesting.
teach ROTC
Hmm.
there. That was like around 2011 or 2012. And
Hmm.
then after Stanford, you went into the private sector, and then you went into the Marines. Can you talk about that journey?
Yeah, so I graduated in mechanical engineering, and I took a few months off because it was the lead up to the Beijing Olympics at that time, and so I made a kind of a run for it in the laser sailing class that I competed in, which was a great experience. I definitely gave it my all. I didn't qualify, but it was a great way to provide closure, to a 20-year sailing career, uh, and really allowed me to kind of hang up the spurs and be happy about it. Um, and so I did that for about 4 months after graduating, and then basically just said, okay, I mean, I have this degree in mechanical engineering. Let's see what it's like. I had done some internships, but see what like a full-time role is like in this field. So I went to work at a venture-backed medical device startup, um, which it was a great experience for me. It had all the mechanical engineering, it had electrical engineering, thermodynamics. It was just like a really interesting problem from an engineering standpoint, and it taught me a lot about what life is like outside of college. And as I was, this was maybe 6, 8 months into this role, I connected with a friend of mine who was a year younger than me, so still at Stanford, and asked him, hey, you're about to graduate. What are you going to do? And he said he was going to join the Marine Corps. And I was like, you are insane. Like that's not what people like us do. You go out, you went to Stanford, you go get the best job you possibly can, and then kind of work your way up from there. And I don't come from a military background, so the thought of it wasn't an option. Like it just my not that I couldn't have done it, but it never occurred to me that that was an option. And so I didn't think much about that conversation, but over time it kept coming back and kept weighing on me. This was 2007 timeframe, so kind of Afghanistan was sort of re-ramping up again. Iraq was coming down kind of from the sort of 2004-5 time frame a little bit, but there was a lot going on, and it just weighed on me that he was going to go over there, he was going to serve, and I was going to kind of be at my desk doing my engineering thing. And it took me a long time. It took me 4, 5, 6 months to really realize that, like, no, I have that option. That's something that I could choose to do, and it sounds super simple, but that was a huge learning point for me in my life. And so I pulled the trigger. I didn't, really, I didn't loop in my parents or anything to the decision. I just, at that point, I just told everybody. And it was definitely a shock to a lot of people, including my parents. But,
And what was it like, Marine Corps basic training? And you went infantry, I believe. Like,
mhm.
talk us through your journey into the Corps.
Yeah, so I I went straight from, Palo Alto working as an engineer to Quantico to OCS, Officer Candidate School. So I basically called them up and was like, "Hey, I want to join the Marine Corps," and they're like, "Awesome, you have a degree. You're going to be an officer." I was like, "What's that?" you know, I didn't even know the difference between enlisted and officer at that point. I was so naive. So they kicked me into OCS, which I am grateful for that kind of leadership opportunity and that path. But so did, yeah, 10 weeks there, and then a 6 month in kind of the at the basic school, which all officers go through together regardless of their MOS, and then in that process got selected to be an infantry officer, and so then went to the IOC, the infantry officer school, um, and yeah, that was another 10 months or 10 weeks. So, it was almost over a year of training, and I certainly needed it. So, but that's the great thing about the Marine Corps is you do, when you come in, when you actually get your platoon as a second lieutenant, you do feel pretty well trained, and there's a lot of respect that you get just having gone through that training.
Can you talk more about that training? You had joked that just now that you needed that training. But like, do you find it stressful? Did you initially find it like, wow, what did I get myself into, and question yourself, and maybe thought, hey, maybe this isn't for me? Like, talk about that process.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was definitely it was a shock. Like, Palo Alto is probably like the most bubbly place on earth. Like, like, I'm going to be in a bubble in a different world where, the physics does not apply. It would be Palo Alto. And so going from there to Quantico, I mean, it was like, going from the sauna into an ice bath. Um, but I mean, I never really felt like, oh, I'm not going to make it, or this isn't for me, even though it was like, you still have that shock of going from one place, to another. I was pretty confident at that point that this is what, I wanted to do. Um, but I also, like, you know, I'd never shot a rifle before. I'd never, a lot of the, um, like a lot of those type of skills, like, were just very foreign to me, and they do a great job of teaching you. So in some cases you're actually more successful because you just listen and you don't have any preconceived notions about how to breathe, how to aim, that kind of thing, and you just do what you're told, and like it actually works pretty well. So I'd say that the training, I was pretty physically fit, so it wasn't so much that, it was more of the mechanics and those type of things that I had to learn.
I personally believe that there are aspects of military training that are actually superior than the education I got at Stanford in certain classes, in terms of
Mhm.
just like how they break it down, and how sometimes I'd feel like this is way too one plus one plus one plus one, but I think the military does a really good job on training people.
Mhm. Yeah. No, definitely. I completely agree, and it's so practical. It's like, in I think a good example is like taking a computer science class at Stanford. Like, they want to keep it high level and they want to keep it philosophical, and you don't come out of there like knowing how to, make a web app. Uh, um, and maybe you do if that's like your full major, but I had to take a bunch of classes in CS, and I certainly didn't, couldn't have been a software developer coming out of there. So
And did you choose infantry or did the Marines assign it to you?
I chose it and was lucky enough to get it. They have a very interesting way of sort of rationing positions. I actually don't know if it's the same way, but they basically break the class into three parts, and they sort of give the number one person their choice, and then the person who's number one in the second tranche gets their first choice. So it's a I guess it's a great way to kind of make sure that all of the all of the roles are filled with high performing people.
I've heard, and I've talked to other Marine Corps infantrymen, and apparently it changes. Certain times it's a third, a third, a third, but only the top third get their top choices, and then, or they'll spread it out. What was your time like in the Marines?
2009, 2010 is kind of when I went into the fleet, and this was in the kind of Obama era surge back into Afghanistan. So zooming out, it was basically like train deploy to both times to Afghanistan and similar places. So it was definitely busy. There was no moment where we were kind of like unsure of what the where we were going, basically, in general. And then, and our first deployment, I was a platoon commander, had a great great set of peers in that company, a great company commander. And we were, as a company, pretty much left to our own devices, in a district in Helmand province. And it was a really it was a really cool experience to kind of have a AO, an area of operations, and to see it improve over time as you're kind of busting your ass patrolling and whatnot. And there was a sense, I think, at that point of like a real commitment to the mission in Afghanistan overall, like a lot of resources. It was clear like we were going to get backfilled by a good by a good unit. And so we could really, commit and really tell the locals that we, were committing, and that I think went a long way. Our second deployment wasn't that far down the road, maybe a year later, but it was very clear the mission at that point had changed to how do we, start getting out of this. And that was mentally challenging, I think, because you saw how much work still needed to be done over there. And yeah, it was more mentally challenging to keep in it, to keep committed and everything, and of course all of your guys, and it was all guys at that point. This was in the area where combat arms was, it was all men at that point. um, and yeah, it was hard to keep everybody kind of fully committed at that point, given that we knew that we weren't getting backfilled, and yet there was still a lot to be done there. So I learned a lot about leadership and how to be in that somewhat tough position. So
Was the second deployment also in Helmand?
it was also in Helmand. We kind of had a mission to sort of uh, take the heat off the Afghans as they were transitioning into leadership, kind of leadership positions, both the police and the army and the government. And so we kind of bounced around. We were kind of a Gila-born company that bounced around to different areas that were sort of outside of the kind of controlled and patrolled areas. So, I was the company XO, which most of my peers in other companies were basically just the admin guy, you know, keeping track of the gear, and their sort of weapon was like a highlighter. But as a a Gila-born company where we were doing these operations, I actually got to be the XO, and the company commander, would take sort of the main effort, and I would take two platoons or one platoon, and one platoon plus, as this kind of supporting effort. So it was a really unique, there's just not there weren't that many kind of company level operations going on. So it was a really unique opportunity to really play the role that the EXO is supposed to play.
Your journey from Pacific Northwest Seattle to Stanford to Quantico to Hellman, I mean, talk about very different places. And I'm curious, like, what are some overall kind of reflections on just having gone from all these different regions of the world and just being like, wow, I'm in Hellman as a company XO.
Yeah, I mean it's very it was shocking to come back, from deployment, go on post deployment leave and be in Seattle. It's like I love it here in the Northwest. I mean, I love the mountains, I love the water. Um, but it also has sort of that bubble component where a lot of people, it's in the cities, it's very like politically homogenous and racially homogenous. Like um, it's just so different from a lot of places, especially from Hellman. And so you just kind of see everybody sort of going about their normal thing with their kind of Seattle viewpoints on things, and it was pretty challenging. Yeah.
My favorite position in the Army was company XO. I felt like you got a chance to mentor people. I thought you didn't have the mantle of leadership, and you weren't signing your life away with all this equipment. And it was just like a really fun role.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, what were your favorite roles in the Marines?
I mean, platoon commander was awesome. It was like everything it was sort of chalked up to be, and also being basically a professional big brother too. They don't teach you at the basic school how to, explain personal finance to your guys. And most of them don't need it, but it's the 80-20 rule. That 20% has no idea how to, they've never had a paycheck before and have no idea how to spend that. Um, you know, trying to get married Friday night to someone they met on Thursday, like so your relationship counselor as well. And I really just enjoyed the kind of holistic aspect, those things plus, teaching them, drilling them. Um, and, it's a totally unique position to be in I think I was maybe 22, 23 at the time. And I had a platoon sergeant who was 37. He had broken time, so he's a little older than a typical platoon sergeant. But to have to earn the respect of someone who had been in the Marine Corps, had been in, I think either Fallujah or Ramadi multiple times, and had all this combat experience. And I'm like this kid from Stanford, from Seattle, who has no idea, what I'm doing other than what I've learned in training. And to have to, earn the respect of someone like that is, I mean, that there's a host of lifelong lessons in that process. So,
I'm going to skip ahead, but also keep us rooted in this chronological journey, and that is you're now a military veteran entrepreneur. What lessons do you apply from your Marine Corps training that you do and utilize as an entrepreneur?
mhm. So many. I mean, I'll pick out two that I think I use the most. Number one is the concept of um, going to the point of friction. When you may be doing an attack, on a fortified position. And I think a lot of people that are not in the military and haven't gone through training expect that if you're the officer, you're supposed to be standing like behind everyone, kind of observing things, like General Lee in the Civil War. Um, but what you learn in the military, as you know, as a leader, is you need to go to the point of friction. Where is the point where the battle's going to be won or lost at that moment? So, in this example where you're taking the fortified position, maybe there's, uh, some wire, that you have to breach. And if you don't breach that wire, like the attack is going to fail. So you, as the leader, instead of being behind everyone, need to be at that point, making sure that that wire is breached. And so you're the platoon commander, but you're basically in the fire team, at that moment that's breaching the wire. And sure, there might be opportunity or times when the point of friction is making sure that you're seeing the entire space, and that you're behind. But I think a lot of leaders in the private sector expect that they should be kind of sitting in their perch and just observing, and shouldn't be like, down deep into the weeds. And true, most of the time, like, you shouldn't be, but you should identify the point of friction and not feel bad about getting deep into the weeds at that particular point. At least that was a learning point that I've been able to take forward. So, it might just be like understanding a contract. Like, this is the critical contract, and so instead of like letting my lawyer, deal with it, I'm going to work hand in hand with them, and I'm going to like review every single word in this particular contract. Uh, um, so yeah, identifying that point of friction and going to that point of friction is one of my biggest takeaways. Number two, we did this great exercise in the infantry officer course where you had to write an order, and you couldn't write in the briefing room. They'd basically give you facts about the situation, but you couldn't write your order in that room. You had to leave the room to write your order, and you could choose how long you stayed in that room. And the longer you stayed, the more facts you had, but the less time you had to write, your order. Um, and so I think back to that a lot because you had to leave kind of at the right time with imperfect information. Otherwise, you just wouldn't get anything done. So figuring out, what is the right time to say, okay, we're not going to have all the information. It's time to execute. I think Colin Powell has a great quote about this. He has some ratio that I'm going to butcher, but it's like the 30-70 rule, or the 40-60 rule. If you have less than 40% of the information, you shouldn't proceed. But if you have more than 60, you should have proceeded previously. So sorry for getting that wrong, but it's something like that. So again, a ton of lessons, but those are probably my top two.
I want to build on what you just said, and that is, in military history, we call going to the friction, I think, the center of gravity, right? I think
Mhm.
that's what Clausewitz says. And then what you described on like leading by example kind of sounds like what today a lot of people call founder mode. But now I realize it's not founder mode, it's military leader mode, right?
Mhm.
It's like I'm going to go to the decisive point of action and be there and lead.
Mhm.
Can you talk about your journey from the Marines back to the civilian sector? And a lot of times, veterans find that transition to be the most difficult because they've never been a civilian. But you were a civilian, and I'm curious, like, did you still find that difficult or not?
Yeah, it was actually really humbling. I mean, I had a, mechanical engineering degree from Stanford, and had was had combat decorations in the Marine Corps. I was like, oh, this is gonna be, no problem. It was really challenging, and so that whole process was very humbling. Um, my sort of default was, maybe we'll go back into engineering, but I had this kind of nagging sense that that's not what I was meant for, and also didn't feel like it built on my experience as much, over the last 4 or 5 years in the Marine Corps. So yeah, it was super challenging, and I mean, I was lucky. I was very lucky that I was in kind of a financial position to take my time. But whenever I was at an event last night with a bunch of transitioning veterans, and I got asked in a circle, what's your, what's your piece of advice for a, transitioning veteran? And for me, it was, just being patient and take your time, because I actually, I had a bunch of opportunities come up that I'm so grateful I turned down, because they just weren't right. And I think a lot of times, I think it's getting better, but especially when I was getting out, these companies had hiring veteran programs, and they had sort of preconceived notions about what jobs could be done by, veterans. And if you didn't fit into that, there was kind of like nothing. And so eventually I did kind of, I found my way through the veteran community. There was a Seattle-based CEO who I ended up working for, um, which sort of, started me on the path to, connecting with you, Tim. But um, he had heard about this position in the military called the XO. He didn't have military experience, but he heard that this existed, and he's like, I got to get me one of these. It sounds amazing. So he was networking in the veteran community trying to find an XO, and of course, that was what I had just done at, company XO. So through the veteran community, I got introduced, to him, and we hit it off, and I ended up coming on board kind of as his, we didn't call it this, but it was basically like a chief of staff type role.
And then this was a startup, this was a semi-established company, and I think this was in the payment space.
Yep, it was a payments company. It was at a time, payments, digital payments has come a long way since, even, since I started there, where payments was really like, it was a standalone sort of industry that you could sell to, a restaurant or an auto body shop. Everybody had these like brick terminals, and it didn't really matter what the business was. You put the terminal, in the business, and so you could walk down Main Street and sell, sell payments as a standalone product to those businesses. Um, and so the company I worked for, Gravity Payments, had been, it was amazing. I mean, there was probably 70 people there at the time. I don't know, it's maybe 10 million in revenue at the time, and totally bootstrapped, by basically just being super diligent and disciplined about this kind of sales process, creating a great sort of customer experience, but really sort of outsourcing a lot of the, the technology and everything, to third parties, and that allowed them to, to bootstrap the business, and that's the way it's, continued to grow, to this day. So while I was there, it grew from basically 10 to $60 million, all sort of, without outside equity. So it was a really interesting perspective, very different from kind of what you get out there and, TechCrunch. Um, and I'm, so grateful that I got that perspective, and can kind of balance that with, some of the other, other ways to grow and that kind of thing. So I learned a ton being able to work with a founder who took, the business from zero to 50, 60 million. That's a fascinating journey to be on.
Two things to build on what you just said there. One is it feels like they were excellent at customer acquisition and marketing, and that you can grow a massive business even without a deep tech stack or a tech innovation or differentiation. And then the second aspect of it that I'm hearing from you is that payments can be a lucrative business.
Yeah, no, I mean it can, and the way it is, it's low margin, and the way that, one of my big takeaways with Gravity is they just invested so much um, in the businesses that they worked with. A lot of companies prioritize customer acquisition and then kind of leave you out to dry when you're on board, and that hurt sales, like it hurt new sales. But when you have a recurring revenue business and you're able to keep people for a really, really long time, you just have this amazing foundation that you're building that you don't even like, you don't even know you're kind of building it, and then it just becomes so, powerful financially over time because you're keeping people for, a really long time. And I think a lot of people don't prioritize that enough. So that was, I mean, that was really cool to see that you know, the benefits of doing that and how strong it makes a company, over time.
Retention. Retention of Marines, retention of customers, retention of revenue. At Gravity Payments, you learned about the payments business, and now I think you're working on a payments business.
Yep, yep. So we through my time there, interacted with some law firms that needed to accept payments, and we worked just in our business with law firms. And oftentimes, I would be, one of the folks at the company sort of liaising with these law firms who were working with us. And when it came time to sort of get the bill from those firms, it had like the little like scissor icon on it, and it was like, figure out a way to get this back to us somehow. And it went to the bottom of the pile. It was like, I don't have time to deal with this. We don't have checks as a business. So, I'm not going to pay this until they like scream at me, 3 months later. And so I was experiencing that as a client on one side of the business. And on the other side, we were helping these businesses set up like seamless kind of e-commerce checkout flows, reducing churn in the process and everything. And finally, I was thinking, why is this one industry so far behind kind of best practices for digital, payments acceptance? And so on the side, started to learn about the business of law. I started to learn about the rules of professional conduct that govern, how money is handled, if it's coming in kind of, in escrow, if you will. Um, and realized that a lot of the best in class tools out there really didn't work. And in fact, in a lot of cases, forced a law firm, if they were using it, to violate their professional ethics rules. And after kind of really uncovering this, decided that in order to bring the whole legal market into the sort of the digital age and get all the benefits of that too, the profit, the revenue increases, the cash flow benefits of doing that. In order for the legal market to get there, they really would need a custom integrated payments solution, and one that not just would be able to serve law firms, but serve the other software companies who are building technology for these firms to manage their cases, their practice, track time, account, do their accounting. Basically, all those tools have a kind of a digital payments or payments tracking need. And we thought, hey, we can sort of power that under the hood. So we kind of think of ourselves at Confido Legal, as kind of the underlying financial engine for the business of law.
So let me try to back brief you. So Confido Legal helps lawyers and law firms get paid, and then also helps them pay out to their clients in the case of if they're a plaintiff and they win a case. Is that right?
Yep, yep, exactly. So kind of payments in, for a lot of the typical practice areas that you see, where the client is, they get an invoice from the firm, or they get a request to deposit money into a, retainer account, um, you know, moving that money from the client, allowing that client to pay very easily, from, the money to go from the client to the law firm into any of their kind of operating or escrow accounts. And then yeah, recently we launched a kind of an outbound product specifically designed for the plaintiff space, personal injury, workers' compensation, mass tort, where uh, they may negotiate or litigate with the insurance company, and then the insurance company, from an injury or something, the insurance company pays the law firm, for a settlement or something like that, or an award, and then the law firm pays that out again to the client. And a lot of these high volume injury firms are they're doing thousands or tens of thousands of these kind of check payments every month. So it's exciting to be able to kind of digitize that experience and also to give those firms kind of a bridge to the next generation of plaintiffs who grew up on Venmo and Cash App and don't want to check and certainly don't want to wait, for a check to come in the mail, assuming it does show up.
And so when did you all start Confido Legal, and how's it going since you all started it?
Yeah, so to kind of bring it back to the cookie business. So one of the reasons I enjoyed working at Gravity Payments so much was that there was really a culture of kind of entrepreneurship. And if you had a good idea, you could kind of go pursue it. And it was your responsibility to make it, successful or to learn from it. If things went wrong, it was your responsibility. But there was a lot of latitude to, to go on those adventures, which I really
That sounds
enjoyed.
like the Marine Corps.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah, you can do whatever you want as long as you take responsibility for it. So I felt right at home, and it really did feel, when as I was thinking about, where have I had the most fun, in a job, it really did feel like, I'm getting kind of the same sort of entrepreneurial excitement that I got, from the cookie business back in the day. Um, and so that really kept me engaged for a decade, at that company. Um, and one of those, experiments was building this solution for, the legal space. And as I mentioned, it wasn't really a technology company at the time. And so this was one of our first real forays into a specific product for a specific vertical. So it got to kind of, we were in kind of uncharted territory at the company. So started what's now Confido Legal as a division, basically, of Gravity Payments. And I think, another kind of piece of advice to the transitioning veteran who's interested in, entrepreneurship, there is another path, which is this kind of entrepreneurship um, path. And of course, you have to find the right company that's going to support you in that, which is pretty hard to find. A lot of people will say that, but very few will, give you the rope to hang yourself. And so I was lucky enough to find that, and it is, I think it is a really really interesting path because I was not I don't think I would have been nearly as successful had I just kind of gone out on my own and tried to figure this thing out from scratch. And so yeah, we built it basically as a division. It was an independent brand, independent, product, but legally a division, and we were all employees of Gravity Payments at the time. And then so we did that for about 2 years, and then the kind of their company strategy changed, and that gave us the opportunity, us being the founders of that division, to buy it from them. And so we did that in early 2023, and they're still they're still a shareholder, vendor, and a big supporter of us. But the company's majority owned by the founders. So it's a really a non-standard kind of origin story, but also grateful that that's the way it did work out.
I tell most future founders, whether they're veterans or not, that one of the best training areas is to go work at a startup, because you get to just learn what it means to be a founder. Um, uh, how's it like being the Confido Legal CEO? Do some days you wish you could trade being in Hellman versus being the CEO? Like what's it like right now?
Yeah, it's very emotionally bumpy. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and it's so hard to you get so invested in the business. It's really hard to separate, your own kind of feeling of your own sort of self-worth from the business and the success there, which, you know, if you zoom in far enough, has nothing to do with your performance. You have to zoom out pretty far to see your impact, on the overall business, over time. But when you're in it, it's just so hard to zoom out in order to, sometimes just make you feel a little bit better about yourself. So, but the highs are high, the lows are low, and so trying to keep it even and mentally even, and not go up with the highs and not come down too far with the lows has been, I've gotten better at that over time.
How do you do that? And how do you cope with that? Do you think that your marine background has helped, or is it going sailing, or is it doing hiking? Like what helps you cope?
Yeah. I mean, having the background, having been, in combat in Helmand certainly helps, because you can always kind of click back to that, and you know that, like, in most of these situations that we're, in, sure, like, someone could lose a lot of money, but no one's going to die. And so that is really nice perspective. I would say that, I in the day to day, like, I care enough about the business, and I'm able to pretend and trick myself into thinking that those two things are, equal, basically. And you have to really, like, I personally have to work hard to sort of come back to that other perspective, and I'm not sure it's good to do that all the time, or else you wouldn't invest, everything into the company. So, yeah, I mean, being able to zoom out and think about, perspective that the military gave me is one big one. Um, I I think another thing that's been, incredibly helpful for me is, just working out in the morning. Um, I've been kind of a lifelong swimmer. I actually don't like exercising in the morning unless it's swimming. Um, I joke that it's kind of like going back to bed, because you get to be horizontal again, and you get the cold water splash on your face. But I think being able to get up and do that in the morning is kind of a superpower, because it just sort of extends, in my mind, kind of extends that sort of useful brain power, farther than it otherwise would go in a given day. So.
At, when I was at Stanford Law School, I had a number of classmates who are veterans, and as I've seen their career progress, I now realize how big the legal industry is and how lucrative it is. I'm curious, as you all have found customers and clients, have you found a lot of veterans in the legal space, and have they been helpful or not?
Yeah, actually, I was just with a veteran last night, who's a lawyer who I met several years ago, because I cold called him. He owns a firm in Seattle. I cold called him and I was like, you're a Marine, I'm a Marine, let's do business. And he was like, no thanks, but why don't you come for a beer? My brother's in town. And so, a few weeks later, we met up for a drink, and I've become, kind of, I don't want to say lifelong, because it's only been 4 years, but good friends with them. And actually, one of the brothers is an investor in our company and has been a huge supporter. So the yeah, the veteran community and the veteran legal community has been, incredibly gracious and helpful, and it's I'm would not be where I am today without that. And it's quite large. There's a lot of veteran lawyers.
uh, Veterans are pretty good at following rules, and so I think that's what attracts them to the legal industry. And I think they're high achievers and strivers. And so your customers are two types. They're law firms, and they're also legal tech partners. So
Mhm.
if there's veterans that are lawyers, they should come talking to you. If there's veterans in the legal tech space, they should talk to you. What type of veterans in the legal tech space would you like to chat with?
That community is quite a bit smaller. But I there's I kind of break the legal tech space down the middle. There's, those who are building technology for like for lawyers to practice law more effectively, kind of like, do legal research, do document, production, apply, AI to, to legal research, writing briefs, that kind of thing. And then on the other side, there's sort of the back office tools. How do you run a successful, law firm? And it's actually a shocking number of lawyers have zero idea how their business actually runs. Um, but those that are, managing partners and are involved, this is the stuff that we do is super important, to them. So I'm very curious from just like a intellectual perspective about the tools for lawyers to practice law better. But where our expertise is more in the kind of the back office. How do the law firms run more effective businesses? So if there are any veterans in either side, I'd love to connect with them. But especially those who are kind of helping law firms run better businesses. That's really our bread and butter.
Awesome. Emery, this has been great chatting with you. I have a few rapid fire questions. Maybe this is top of mind because Halloween just happened, and we both have young kids. But what's your favorite candy, if you even like candy?
Reese's. Yeah, I stole a lot of Reese's from my kids.
Reese's Pieces or Reese's Cups?
Cups, definitely.
Favorite movies?
Uh, Favorite movies. Oh man, I was not prepared for this. Um, I think this is going to be very embarrassing, but Tom Hanks' finest performance, a little known film called The Burbs. Um, it's with Carrie Fisher also, who is, Princess Leia. And it's a great kind of wacky story about the suburbs.
I thought you were gonna say some more well-known Tom Hanks films, um, uh, but like Big or what's the one where he's stranded on the island? But okay, I'm gonna check
No,
that out now.
right. No, if I ever see Tom Hanks in the wild, I'm gonna go up and tell him that I really admired his performance in The Burbs.
Fascinating. Favorite place to travel to?
I got to the trip of a lifetime I had with a couple friends and my wife. We went to Svalbard, which is technically part of Norway-ish, but it's up at the Arctic Circle. And we got to, it was at a time when it's basically there's 24 hours of daylight, and we would sail during the day, anchor, and then hike up and ski during the night, and then rinse and repeat for a week. And it was, I've never had any trip come close to that.
Favorite historical leader or present day leader?
Mm, I I mean, this is going to sound really cliche, but I do think a lot about Abraham Lincoln and the way he brought kind of intellect to a really the most divided time. I mean, we all like kind of think about the election just happened. This will come out later, but we 2 days ago we just elected a new president, and everybody's thinking about, oh, the country is so divided right now, blah blah blah. But like, no, we went to war with each other, at one point, and to be able to kind of bring, um, to be able to prosecute that and bring everybody together in the end is just, I mean, it's just amazing what he was able to accomplish.
Favorite bands or types of music?
So, favorite band, I'm a huge fan of kind of the 70s, 60s classic rock. Huge Santana fan, Grateful Dead. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Emery, I want to mention a book that I think you'll really like. It's called Blue Mind. You probably have heard of it. It's the surprising science that shows how being near, in, on, or underwater can make you happier, healthier, more connected, and better at what you do.
All
And
right.
it's just a book about how like the water and our brain is like roughly the same percentage of the world, and how like water really like helps us, swimming and all of that. This has been fantastic and fun. Emery, wishing you and your team tremendous success. Your journey is very inspirational, from Stanford to the Marine Corps to becoming a military veteran founder. We have extreme, and I'll use a military phrase, extreme and utmost confidence in your abilities as a founder. And we hope you win all the decorations, awards that founders uh, are able to achieve. Thank you again, Emery.
Thanks a lot, Tim. Yeah, really appreciate it. All the support that you and your team have given us.
Thank you.